What means that the people who are funding illegal activity, the people who are funding these riots that are burning our cities to the ground, funding the paid protesters who are going through American cities and busting out glass windows and looting our stores and beating up random Americans on the streets, those people are going to be held accountable. And you know what? That's what the American people have been begging for. They were begging for it for 4 years under Joe Biden when we had an administration who could care less about the plight of our people who are being plundered by these absolutely lawless rioters who are now, thankfully, declared, and I think rightfully so, a domestic terrorist organization. So what it really means is accountability. But I think that the public needs to know who's paying for this. We need to, I think we should have congressional hearings on it, but ultimately these people should be thrown in jail, and that's the goal.
Well, congressional hearings, here, let me back up. 97% of Americans want illegal aliens deported, those who've committed violent crimes. But Antifa riots, you point out, they've destroyed parts of Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Portland. You know, the administration and Justice Department says Antifa is a militaristic anarchist operation. It explicitly calls for the overthrow of the government and the U.S. law system of law. But Democrats claim this operation doesn't exist. What do you make of that?
Well, that's kind of the logical progression we hear from Democrats every time there is a problem. They did the same thing with illegal immigration. It was, don't believe the evidence of your eyes and ears. It's not really a problem. Antifa doesn't exist. The borders aren't really open. And then whenever the American people realize that Republicans are right, that Antifa is a big problem, it does exist, it is a coordinated organization, that the borders have been open, then Democrats try to tell the American people that it may be there, but it's not a real problem. In other words, Antifa is not a bad thing. And that's sort of where we're at now. I think it's very hard for Democrats to credibly say that Antifa doesn't exist after 4 years of rioting and looting, but that's the kind of dishonesty we come to expect from them.
You mentioned that Congress should hold hearings. Should it hold hearings stipulating that when you fund violent rioting, that's against U.S. law, not just U.S. tax law. So they could lose their tax-exempt status, their tax-free status. Will that be the focus of it? Will you guys basically point out, you know, George Soros's groups? There's a bunch of that big network that is funding these Antifa riots. Will you name names, try to call on them in, and do you think that the Justice Department, and rather the Treasury Department with the IRS, will they audit these groups and revoke their tax-free status?
Yes, absolutely. That is the goal here. The goal is if these organizations are getting tax-free benefits and they're engaged in political activity illegally, that status needs to be revoked, and we need to do that in a very clear and public way. The purpose of these hearings is to get the information so that we can make that determination. But secondly, I think that if you have these organizations that are funding illegal activity in the United States, people need to be held, people need to go to jail for that. That is a much broader criminal conspiracy that needs to be dealt with. So I do think this is a two-front fight for us. It is going after organizations that are engaged in illegal political activity, but also going after organizations that are funding illegal activity in general, these riots, and those people need to be held accountable as well.
It sounds like RICO racketeering charges, too. Congressman